Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you are well, and congratulations, you have made it to the very last lecture of the semester. We are almost finished, so congratulations on that. Just a couple quick business items, a reminder. Your lab exams are almost finished with their grading. I have a few things to finish yet because some folks needed to take the exam at alternative times, but by the end of today, certainly all of those exams will have been reviewed, and I will send out an email to let you know that. By and large, the grades have been pretty strong. Class average at this time is standing at around an 82 or 83%. Okay, so please look for a message for me later today that the grades are finalized and that you can log in the class marker to get your final grade. So I'm 99% done and should finish that today. Okay, so so the next major challenge for you is the final exam coming up this Monday, May 11th, and the nature of the exam will be exactly as you've come to expect online. You will go to classmarker.com on Monday the 11th, and you will have between 7 a.m. and midnight on Monday to finish the exam. You will also have 2 hours of time to do so. It is a time slot that's established by the school, so you have 2 hours to complete your final exam. Okay, folks, do you have any questions right now in terms of what to expect moving into the very last days of our course? Okay. Now is the very last time that we will kind of be together online before your final exam. So I want to encourage you, is there anything right now that I can help clarify for you to help relieve any stress or anxiety you might be experiencing right now? Any questions you might have? Okay, sounds like everybody must be okay. By all means, if you do have questions, send me an email. I will be monitoring
Can
email.
you
Yes.
explain the essay questions about the flow chart? I'm a little confused by it.
Okay. So essay questions 2 and 3, I'm getting a lot of questions from students because I think it's scaring people. The whole idea is that, there's a chain of events that must occur between receiving a stimulus and your body responding. So in other words, the start point of the conversation is some kind of stimulus. Okay, let's talk about a stretch reflex, like the patellar tendon reflex. Okay, if you strike the tendon, then that stretches the tissue. The next thing that happens after that is that the muscle tissue stretches. The next thing after that is that an electric signal travels to the spinal cord. And the next thing after that is an electrical signal sent back to the muscle to contract. In other words, there's a sequence of events between the starting point defined in the essay and the end point defined in the essay. And your goal is to document and explain the series of physiological events that happens between the start point and the end point that is defined in the essay. Am I making sense, Kimberly?
Kind of. I'm still a little. I think I'm just gonna be confused until I can figure it out basically on my own.
Right. In other words, this is a challenging question, but that's what we're here to do, is to challenge you. Okay, so let me read the information I gave you on the study guide for Essay 2. It says, during the fight or flight response, which, by the way, we talked a lot about in your notes, Okay, if you've reviewed your notes over the past several days, we talked about what happens if you were at a scary movie. So there could be some help in there for you. So during the fight or flight response, processes in the body involved with the digestion of food slow down or even stop. Create a flow chart that accurately describes the anatomy and physiology of electrical signals that are transmitted from the brain down the spinal cord and out to the peripheral neurons that regulate digestive system activity in the small intestine. So the start point for your flow chart is going to be the electrical signals that are leaving the brain and coming down the spinal cord. I want you to document what anatomy of the brain those electrical signals are coming from, because the brain has just made a decision about how to respond to the fear that you are experiencing. So I want you to document the series of events from the signal leaving a particular region of your brain down the spinal cord, and the series of events that allows that electrical signal, perhaps via synapses with other cells and neurotransmitter release and ganglions, all that content that is described in chapters 15 and 16, how it causes the digestive activity in the small intestine to slow down. So your start point is the electrical signal leaving the brain, and your end point for the flow chart is what happens in the small intestine. To help you with thinking about how to achieve that goal, I give you a series of questions lettered A through G on your study guide that are trying to help you figure out what kind of information you need to be thinking about as you design a flow chart. So if you're finding it difficult to get started, what I recommend is you look at the questions I've given you in your essay, and you simply start by trying to answer them. Just figure out what the answer to each question is. Then after you have those answers, try to write a well-formed paragraph that puts the language of the answers into a logical sequence of events. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. And once you've got your paragraph designed, all you have to do is convert it into a flow chart. Write a simple statement followed by an arrow to another statement that comes next, followed by another arrow to another statement that comes next. Okay. What else can I help you with that, Kimberly?
That actually makes sense. The problem is that I didn't know how to start the flow chart. So since you explained to kind of go through the numbers of the questions that you gave us to answer those, that would probably, I didn't think to even do that first. I was just more confused of you just saying, oh, do a flow chart. I think that's what scared me, but that kind of makes sense to answer those questions and then go from there.
Okay. I will fully admit that these are not easy essays, but we're trying to get you to move beyond superficial knowledge in the course, where you're not just memorizing things, but you're trying to connect the dots of how one physiological process influences the next physiological process, and so on and so forth, so that your body can do the marvelous things that it actually does. So that's going to be the challenge for you for essays 2 and 3. Okay. Any other questions? So Jennifer, you asked about this. You say it's really weird. It's only really weird, Jennifer, because you've never done it before. So as you do these sorts of things, you understand their value. I do want a flow chart, but I think to create the flow chart, it might be helpful during your own study time to actually create a paragraph first. Once you got the paragraph done, then it's very easy to convert the paragraph into a flow chart. Okay, other questions? So Mosena, you will have a full 2 hours, 120 minutes to take the exam. Okay, so, you know, as you are preparing from the study guide that I've given you, you know, the better prepared you are, the more time you will potentially have during that 2-hour window to look up information that maybe you're not quite so familiar with. Okay. How many questions are in the test? Well, let me see here. There are 18 multiple choice and there are 18 fill in the blank. And then there are the 4 major essays which have been provided on your study guide. Okay. There's only a few questions that I haven't warned you about. But after all, again, we are here to challenge you, and so I reserve the right to do that. Okay, anything else? Okay, all right. So remember, folks, particularly in terms of these essays that seem a little bit scary, that your best weapon here is preparation. You know, do the hard work before you get to the test, and things will go a lot more smoothly. Okay. All right. So again, if you have other questions, by all means, send me emails, or, you know, I can chat after our class today online with you. If you have some more questions, I'd be happy to do that. Well, let's see how much of chapter 16 we can finish here. These chapters are so information dense, but I will try my best to give you a good overview here. Okay, so let's continue, and we will now go to the typical Microsoft Word document that we've been using all semester here. Okay. The chat window is still open, so if you need to say something or type something, feel free to do that. So right now on your screen, you should see a Word document where we have some notes that we finished with from last time, where we were talking about proprioceptive sensations. And we had specifically defined a muscle spindle, which you see again in chapter 16. Let me get the actual page here because I've been going back and forth in the textbook to different things. So I'm talking about content that you see on page 556. 556, figure 16.4. Okay, notice that that picture does point out what a muscle spindle is. And we know that a muscle spindle is what is responsible for changing the length of the skeletal muscle and participating in a stretch reflex, such as, such as when a doctor goes around and hits your patellar tendon with a little rubber hammer. That would be an example of a stretch reflex. Okay, so any questions about the muscle spindle from your own study time? Okay, let's continue then. So there are 3 receptor types that allow us to receive these proprioceptive sensations. And remember, proprioception is your brain's awareness of the body parts and what is happening with them in 3-dimensional space, right? So you know where your right toe is on your foot at this time without even looking at it because of these proprioceptive sensations. Okay. The second thing we need to add to your notes are tendon organs. Okay. Tendon organs are located at the junction of a tendon and a muscle. All right. There is an example of a tendon organ. It's not really drawn the best, but it is there also on figure 16.4, page 556 there. You see down towards the lower left corner of the picture, you see You see the tendon, the white connective tissue there, and they've kind of highlighted some nervous system anatomy in that tendon. That is the tendon organ. Okay. And so let's see what we should say about this. Tendon organs, their function is to reduce muscle tension. Their function is to reduce muscle tension by promoting muscle relaxation. Okay, and so this is meant to be a protective, this is actually meant to be a protective mechanism to avoid muscle damage from having the muscle contract too forcefully. Okay, you could actually damage your muscle by having too forceful of a contraction. This is a protective mechanism to avoid muscle damage from too much muscle tension. Okay, so if you do have your textbook available, okay, you want to keep your page on page 556, but if you have your textbook easily available here, you might want to turn back to pages 468 and 469. And I simply want to point out here, once again, I'm highlighting the fact that there are 5 chapters of nervous system content in the textbook. We've only had time to lecture on 3 of them during our normal lecture time, and you've done a series of anatomy-related homework assignments in lab from the other chapters and content covered in the other chapters, okay? So we're doing our best with the time we have to cover as much content as possible. On page 468, you do have an example of the stretch reflex, okay? That's figure 1314, so that involves the muscle spindles, right? The muscle spindles. But then on page 469, you have the tendon reflex, okay? The tendon reflex of figure 1315 here. So this is what we're really talking about that involves the tendon organ, okay? So let me ask you something here. I just want to be sure everybody's interpreting this information correctly. On page 469, what color are the dendrites of the tendon organ? Please type that into the chat window if you see what I'm talking about. What color are the dendrites of the tendon organ? Does everybody see that? Page 469, figure 1315. What color are the dendrites? Okay, Alexia, blue. Okay, I hope everybody is looking at their textbook. That is correct, Alexia. Thank you very much. So folks, stay with me here. So the blue dendrites in the tendon are the tendon organ. And notice how the axon leaves the tendon organ in the picture there, and it's going into your spinal column there until it synapses with another structure that is purple. What's that purple thing inside the spinal cord? What would that be? What is the purple line in the spinal cord? What is that? Okay, thank you, Ashley. It's an interneuron. Very nice. Okay, and then you notice the interneuron synapses with another neuron, which is indicated by a dotted red line back to the muscle. And someone tell me in your textbook, at the synapse between the purple interneuron and the red postsynaptic cell, there's a little symbol there. Is it plus or minus? Is it plus or minus? It's minus. Thank you, Lindsay and Pamela. Exactly. So that's the point. Okay. In other words, that minus sign is telling you that the electrical signal coming out of that red neuron there is going to be inhibitory, meaning it's going to promote muscle relaxation. And don't you see on the screen from the notes, we're talking about a tendon organ promoting muscle relaxation. So that's what we're talking about here. And hopefully you can graphically see that on page 469, figure 1315. Gang, do you have any questions right now? Okay. All right. All right. So one more question for you here, and then we will continue forward. I just want to be sure about something. So I'll put this question into your notes. What is muscle tension? Can you tell me that? What is muscle tension? If you think you can answer that, go ahead and unmute your microphone or type it into the chat window. What do you think muscle tension is?
Is it when the body is semi-contracted to extended period of time?
Well, what do you mean by semi-contracted? What does that mean?
Like your body is so stressed out that it can leave your body really tense.
Okay, so thank you, Zuzette. So it is true that a lot of times when us human beings feel stressed, we might have a lot of muscle tension in our neck or shoulder muscles. Everybody carries their stress a little bit differently. So certainly muscle tension can be felt at times when you're stressed out. But to get to the specific idea of muscle tension, okay, Lindsay, you say contracted muscles. That's really not a bad idea here. But the idea I'm trying to get across to you is that muscle tension is a force that's actually created when both ends of a muscle pull towards each other. Okay, so
no. Hey, excuse me. What did I tell you about what?
Folks.
You say yes or can I help you?
All right, let me
I taught you manners. Now I have to reteach you manners.
hold on a sec, folks. Okay. All right. So yeah, let me go back to the Word document here. Okay. In case you missed it, let me type it into our document here so you have it. Muscle tension is the force created when both ends of the muscle pull toward each other. So certainly muscle contraction is involved, Lindsay. Okay, and so if you feel tension in your neck or shoulder when you're stressed out, that's what's actually happening. The muscles in your shoulders, in your neck, they're pulling towards each other, okay? And that's what's creating the tension that is part of the stress that you feel. What is a knot? A knot, Lindsay, is an area of muscle tissue that's hypercontracted, and that's also typically caused by stress. And honestly, that's often caused by an imbalance in calcium levels in the muscle cells of the knot itself. Okay. All right. Okay, gang. Let's by all means ask the questions. I'm going to roll because there's just a lot I want to get into your notes here. So the third proprioceptive receptor are the joint kinesthetic receptors. Okay. Your book doesn't give a specific picture on that, and I'm not going to try to take time to show you at this time, but the joint kinesthetic receptors there are actually multiple types that are found within and around the articular capsules of synovial joints. So we talked a little bit about synovial joints earlier in the semester. Okay, so joint kinesthetic receptors, there's actually multiple types. So this is a deeper conversation for another day. We won't have time to do that today. But they are located within the articular capsules of the synovial joints, and their function is to provide information about joint position and joint motion to the central nervous system. Okay. All right, so folks, we're about to leave the overall topic of proprioceptive sensations and the type of receptors. Do you have any questions about that content before we move forward? Okay. All right, so the next major talking point is the topic that starts on page 557 and it goes over for the next several pages. It's the somatic sensory pathways. Okay. Let me just start out by saying that the somatic sensory pathways, they function to relay, kind of like a relay race at the Olympic Games where one runner carries a baton and then transfers the baton to the next runner in the race. Just kind of with that analogy, the somatic sensory pathways, their function is to relay information from somatic sensory receptors to the primary somatosensory area in the brain, which is actually the post-central gyrus. And I want to show you what that is in just a moment. So their function is to relay information from somatic sensory receptors to the primary somatosensory area, which is the post-central gyrus in the parietal lobe of the cerebral cortex. Okay, and so certainly you know the cerebral cortex is the outer surface of the brain. It's the outer surface of the cerebrum. And to the cerebellum, which you all know. I know you know that because many of you did very well on your lab exam. Okay, so just so we know what the anatomy is that we're talking about here. If you have your book again, please turn to page 497. Page 497, figure 1411. Figure 1411. And on that page, there's picture A there along the top right corner of page 497. Take a look where the post-central gyrus is. And from a different viewpoint, the lateral perspective of the brain on the bottom middle of the page, you also see the post-central gyrus. Just so I know that you're looking at the right thing, folks, can somebody please type into the chat window, what color is the post-central gyrus in your textbook? Okay, page 497. What color is the post-central gyrus? Okay, the post-central gyrus is most definitely not pink. Okay, at least if you're using the same edition of the book as I am, it's not pink. Take a closer look again. Do you see it? The post-central gyrus. I'm not talking about the pre-central gyrus. Okay, Ashley, it is blue, right? It's like a bluish purple color, okay? So be sure that you've located that on page 497. So what we're saying is sensory receptors. You know, it could be a sensory receptor on the surface of your skin, okay? It will send information that ultimately reaches into the precentral gyrus here, which is within the parietal lobe of your cerebral cortex. And it's from there that information begins to integrate in such a way that your brain can make a decision about exactly what it is experiencing and what, if anything, it might want to tell the body to do in response to that. Okay? All right, so again, page 497, figure 1411, you can find the post-central gyrus. Okay, I'm going to continue here. So, somatosensory pathways are literally composed of thousands of groups of 3 neurons. So a group would have 3 neurons, and we have pathways made of thousands of these groups of 3 neurons. Okay? Composed of thousands of groups of 3 neurons. Okay, make sure that you appreciate that language. Thousands of groups of 3 neurons. I'll italicize that. Okay, all right, so these neurons are what you see here on the various pictures of figure 16.5, 16.6, 16.7. Okay, so let's talk about what these 3 different kinds of neurons actually are. First, we have the first order neurons. Okay, first order sounds like something out of Star Wars, but at any rate, it's the first order neurons. The first order neurons are the neurons that conduct the impulses, the action potentials from the somatic sensory receptors into the brainstem or spinal cord. Okay, these are the neurons that pick up the information about the stimulus at a location of your body. You know, if we're talking about somatosensory, we're typically talking about sensations that are on the surface of your body. Okay, if we were talking about visceral sensations, then we would be talking about neurons that are coming out of an organ like a kidney or a heart or even a blood vessel. Okay, but these first order neurons conduct impulses from the sensory receptors into the spinal cord. Next, we have the second order neurons. Okay, second order neurons are a type of interneuron. And remember, interneurons are all about acting as a bridge between other cells. So a type of interneuron that transmits impulses from the brainstem or spinal cord to the thalamus. Okay, and I know many of you know where the thalamus is because, again, you did well on your lab exam, and that's fantastic. I'm very happy with that. Okay, remember, you should think of the thalamus as the equivalent of an air traffic controller at an airport, right? Think about, you know, right now airports are kind of shut down pretty much because of the coronavirus emergency, but think about on a busy holiday at LaGuardia or any other major airport around the world, how busy it is. Air traffic controllers got to be sure they coordinate the motion of that of those planes in a logical, safe way, or else we have, we have planes colliding with each other. The thalamus is very similar in the sense that it is coordinating the input of information into the brain and relaying it out to the appropriate subsection of the brain that's responsible for interpreting what should happen. Okay. Now, remember, before reaching the thalamus, second order neurons actually cross over to the other side of the body. It's kind of weird. Okay. Before reaching the thalamus, second order neurons, the fancy phrase here is decussate, D-E-C-U-S-S-A-T-E. They decussate. Means they cross over to the opposite side. Okay. So let me be sure that you're following along here on figure 16.5 of page 558. On page 558, what color are the second order neurons? What color are the second order neurons on page 558? Okay, thank you very much, gals. Pamela, Lindsay, purple is exactly right. Okay, and so, okay, good. You have found what I'm talking about. Very good. So the second order neurons actually cross over to the other side of your spinal cord. Now, why decussation actually occurs is still a medical mystery. We don't know why that happens. In fact, we do see that if you look at other forms of life on the planet, if you examine, if you do a dissection of various animals that live on the planet, you will find decussation is commonly seen in other animal bodies, not just the human body. So decussation probably has something to do, it's probably related to the evolution of life on our planet, but we don't really understand why it occurred. Is it a physiological necessity that this happens? Well, we don't know. We observe that it does occur, but we don't know why it happens. Okay, so that's still a medical mystery. Why decussation occurs is not clear, but it is also seen throughout the evolution of animal life on our planet. Okay, so we're not the only ones that do it. Other animals do it too. We just don't know why it has occurred. There must be something about the evolution of life on our planet that allowed or promoted it to occur, but we don't know why. Okay. All right, so then the second order neurons, they are going to synapse with the third order neurons. So the third member of our group here are the third order neurons. Okay, the third order neurons are also types of interneurons that transmit impulses from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory areas of the cerebral cortex on the same side of the body. Okay, so once again, a third order neuron is a type of interneuron that transmits impulses from the thalamus to the primary somatory sensor area of the cerebral cortex on the same side of the body. Okay, and this also illustrates an important point. You can see that both the second and third order neurons are both considered interneurons. Okay, so you could have, you know, in a typical diagram you might get in a beginning level textbook, you might have a presynaptic neuron, then an interneuron, then a postsynaptic neuron. But it is very possible that you can have a presynaptic neuron connected to one interneuron, connected to another interneuron, and then to a following postsynaptic neuron after that, right? So you can have literally multiple interneurons between the start and ending points of where the information has to travel. Okay, questions at this time? Okay, I hope you're not passed out on your living room floor. And let's continue here. Okay, so we're talking about somatic sensory pathways. The second bullet point here is that the three general somatosensory pathways send sensory information to the cerebral cortex, and we're going to define what these three pathways actually are. Okay, so the first one is the one that I was asking you some questions about on page 558. It is the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway. Right? Like with most things in our course, it's quite a mouthful to even say that. This is figure 16.5. This pathway that you graphically see on figure 16.5 is responsible for transmitting sensory information for touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious. Remember, we talked about the difference between subconscious and conscious. Conscious proprioception from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior back of the head to the cerebral cortex. Okay, it's responsible for transmitting sensory information for touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious proprioception from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex. Okay, now the axons that actually facilitate the communication through this pathway form anatomical structures in the spinal cord that are simply called the posterior column. If you had a way to, you know, and obviously this has been done by people over the years, you know, I mean, we have the luxury of using visible body software, right? But you appreciate 100 years ago, nobody had this. So in the earliest days of when doctors were trying to acquire medical knowledge, literally, they would hire unscrupulous people to go dig up dead bodies at the graveyard and bring them back to their laboratories where they would dissect them to learn about the structure and anatomy of the body. And what I'm saying is through those activities over the decades of research, we have come to understand that there's literally, if you can imagine like a tube running down your spinal cord, like a cylindrical cylinder, a tube, you would find different columns, right? That tube, that column is made of bundles of axons of neurons, and one of them is the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway. Okay. So the axons of this pathway that facilitate communication through this pathway form anatomical structures in the spinal cord called the posterior column, called the posterior column and the medial lemniscus. Okay, that word lemniscus, I had to look it up too because it's not something that's been in my normal background. Lemniscus is a Greek word which means ribbon or band. Think about, you know, a ribbon that you might use to tie up a Christmas package. That's the kind of ribbon we're talking about. So this anatomical structure, which is called the medial lemnis, people who studied it, observed it first, thought it looked kind of like some form of ribbon. Lemniscus is Greek for ribbon. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep rolling, folks, because we're already getting a little short on time here. We're talking about these different pathways. So figure 16.5 defines the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway. Quite a mouthful. The second one is figure 16.6 on page 559. This is the anterolateral, also sometimes called the spinothalamic pathway. Okay, this is figure 16.6. Okay, this pathway is responsible for transmitting sensory information for pain. So if you're feeling a sensation where the tissue might be in danger of being damaged, it's going to be transmitted through the anterolateral pathway for pain, cold, you know, it's a little chilly outside right now, warmth, itch, and tickle from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex, right? I mean, you appreciate that one of the major challenges and continuing challenges of modern neuroscience is to literally map up these, literally design and build, construct a map of how these axons move throughout the body, where they actually go to, where they send signals to what specific subregions of the brain. This is not a trivial task. Okay. The axons that facilitate this communication form anatomical structures in the spinal cord called the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts. Okay. Okay. All right. So there we have a rough definition of what the anterolateral pathway is responsible for. Continuing, let's take the third one, which is the trigeminothalamic pathway of figure 16.7, page 560. Trigeminothalamic pathway, which is figure 16.7 on page 560. Okay, this is responsible for transmitting the following. It's responsible for transmitting sensory information for tactile. Right? You touch it, you can feel the roughness or smoothness of a surface. Thermal, okay, and pain sensations from the face, nasal cavity, oral cavity, and teeth to the cerebral cortex. Okay. Question coming through the chat window. Of the three pathways we have just talked about, which pathway would send pain sensation due to a cavity to the brain? Which pathway have we talked about that would send pain information due to a cavity in a tooth to the brain? Okay, thank you, Ashley. That's right. I mean, you know, the whole point of the question is, are you staying focused, right? Because if you're staying focused, then that's a very simple question to answer, because obviously we just put down the fact that the trigeminothalamic pathway is responsible for sending information from the teeth to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so if you have ever had a cavity and it's hurt you, well, you can be assured that electrical impulses were traveling into the brain along neurons that are part of the trigeminothalamic pathway. Very nicely done. Okay, and so keeping in with our notes here, axons that facilitate communication through this pathway form anatomical structures in the spinal cord. Okay, so these things can be observed when you do a cadaver dissection. They form anatomical structures in the spinal cord called the trigeminothalamic tract. Okay. The trigeminothalamic tract. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? We have the trigeminothalamic tract, which is part of the trigeminothalamic pathway. We have the spinothalamic tracts up here, which are responsible for the anterolateral or spinothalamic pathway. So there's that correspondence of terms. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, once again, it doesn't look like we have any guys on the meeting with us today. So gals, I'm going to continue to roll forward here. I don't know how much of this I can finish with you, but there's just so much to do. Okay, letter C. There are two. Okay, so up here we said there's three general somatosensory pathways that send information to the cerebral cortex. Okay, to the cerebral cortex. There are actually another two general somatosensory pathways that send information not to the cerebral cortex, but to the cerebellum. Okay. And so what I'll mention here, I'm simply going to mention their names and not really go into a lot of detail for, because our time is really waning here. The names of these are, in fact, the anterior spinocerebellar tract, okay, And you can appreciate that the cerebellum is involved here, right? Because part of the word is cerebellar. Okay, so use the words, use the language to help you know what we're referring to at any moment of time. And we also have the posterior spinocerebellar tract. Okay, in both cases, in both tracts, they convey proprioceptive nerve impulses from muscles and tendons in the trunk and lower limbs to the cerebellum, which helps maintain your balance. Both tracts convey proprioceptive nerve impulses from muscles and tendons in the trunk and lower limbs to allow the cerebellum to coordinate movement and maintain posture and balance. It might also be of somewhat note to you, sort of a trivia point, that along these two tracts, along these two cerebellar tracts, the axons of the neurons do not cross over. They do not cross over. There's no decussation. Again, why that has to be the case, I don't know. We don't know, and I don't know that we ever will know. Okay. Whew. Okay, here we go, folks. Let's keep rolling here. Please feel free again to slow me down if you have questions. Now I want to talk about the broader topic of controlling body motion. Okay, this is a big topic. I don't honestly know that we're going to finish it, but I'll give you as much as I can. Control of body movement. Okay, this is a topic that begins on page 562, spills over to 563, 564, 565, 566, 67. This basically finishes out the chapter here. So we may not get it all finished, but we're approaching the end, and that's encouraging. So the first thing to remember here is that all the excitatory and inhibitory signals that control body movement, they actually come together. They converge on motor neurons that extend out of the brainstem and spinal cord as they enter the skeletal muscles. All excitatory and inhibitory signals that control movement converge, meaning come together, on motor neurons that extend out of the brainstem and spinal cord as they innervate the skeletal muscles. All right. Now, another piece of information to keep in your head. Of course, you know, there's always too much to keep in your head. I appreciate that. The motor neurons that directly innervate skeletal muscles are actually given a special name. They are called lower motor neurons. Okay, lower motor neurons. And so, you know, if this terminology is referenced on page 563, figure 16.9. If you look at figure 16.9, if you look at some of the language, you will find the phrase lower motor neuron, lower motor neuron. Okay. The motor neurons that directly innervate skeletal muscles are called lower motor neurons, or LMNSs for short. Okay. By contrast, there are upper motor neurons that regulate lower motor neurons. By contrast, upper motor neurons regulate lower motor neurons. Okay, so UMNs. Now, I do have to put a caution point here in your notes right now. Okay, please note. Okay, please take note that the upper motor neurons, unfortunately, they are not really motor neurons. Okay, they were mislabeled years ago, but as the history of human knowledge is a little bit clunky and blurry at times, the name stuck even though they're technically not motor neurons. The upper motor neurons that we put into your notes are called upper motor neurons, but they are not motor neurons. They are actually interneurons. Okay. Due to the sloppiness of human knowledge, upper motor neurons are not really motor neurons, but are interneurons. Okay. It's something that I'm not going to beat you up about. I simply want you to know this, okay? I simply want you to have heard it. The upper motor neurons are not really motor neurons. They're interneurons. Okay, so let's continue here. Now, all right. I'd like to take a closer look at figure 16.9 with you. Neural circuits that regulate the motor neurons. Let's talk about this. Okay, let's step through this a little bit together. Figure 16.9, page 563. Okay, first off, please appreciate that information from the somatic sensory neurons, such as pain receptors and muscle spindles, is received by a local circuit neuron found in the brainstem and spinal cord. Okay, information from somatic sensory receptors, such as pain receptors and muscle spindles, is received by LCNs, or local circuit neurons, found in the brainstem and spinal cord. Okay. Now, folks, I know we're getting a lot of new language here and a lot of new terminology. Don't be scared of it. I promise you I'm not beating you up on your exam about it, although you might think so. But, you know, a neuron is a neuron is a neuron. Okay, when we talk about local neurons or upper neurons or lower neurons, they're all neurons. All we're saying is that they're at a different point in the communication pathway between the sensory stimulus and transmitting information into the brain. Okay, but they're still all neurons. All the information you learned in chapter 12 is still relevant. Okay, so number 2 here. Actually, there's a subnote here I want to give you. Okay, the local circuit neurons act as interneurons, and they transmit information to the lower motor neurons to coordinate muscle contraction. The local circuit neurons acting as interneurons transmit information to the lower motor neurons to coordinate muscle contraction. Okay. Now, at the same time that this is occurring, the upper motor neurons are going to be involved. So simultaneously, the upper motor neurons located in the cerebral cortex send information to the local circuit neurons, and sometimes even directly to the local motor neurons to help coordinate voluntary muscle contractions that move your body. Such as right now, you might want to voluntarily run away from your computer because you're feeling overloaded. Well, if you did that, certainly the neurons of this neural circuit on figure 16.9 would be involved with that. So let me complete the note here. Simultaneously, upper motor neurons located in the cerebral cortex send information to the local circuit neurons and sometimes to the lower motor neurons to help coordinate voluntary muscle contractions that move the body. Okay. Additionally, simultaneously, okay, so we had number one happen, and while that was happening, the upper motor neurons were involved in things, and simultaneously, there's something else going on in here. That would be neurons that are part of the basal nuclei of your brain, okay? Simultaneously, basal nuclei neurons, okay, which you can see in figure 1413. Due to our time, I won't have you go back and look at that right now, but during your study time, go back and look at figure 1413. These basal nuclei neurons communicate impulses to the upper motor neurons, which help start and stop movement of the body. Which help start and stop movements, suppress unwanted movements, and establish a normal level of muscle tone. Okay. All right. So I know this is a lot, and so I'm going to ask you a question at this time to see if you're awake. Okay. So all right. What is the difference between a ganglion and a nucleus in the nervous system? Okay, now when I say nucleus, I am not talking about the location inside every cell that has the DNA. I'm talking about the nucleus as it is defined in the context of nervous system. What is the difference between a ganglion and a nucleus in the nervous system? Does anybody know that? What's the difference? Right, because up here in the last note, we talked about basal nuclei, right? Basal nuclei. So what's the difference between a nucleus and a ganglion? Okay, so Jennifer, you're telling me that ganglions are clusters of nerve cell bodies. And you are right, but so is a nucleus. So what's the difference? Okay, so Jennifer told me, you may not be able to see it, I'm not sure, but Jennifer told me through the chat window that ganglia are clusters of nerve cell bodies. And that's right. Okay, Jennifer, fantastic. Absolutely. One is in the central nervous system and the other is in the peripheral nervous system. That's exactly right. So ganglion are groups of nerve cell bodies, neuronal cell bodies that are present in the peripheral nervous system, and nuclei are groups of cell bodies, neuron cell bodies in the central nervous system, right? Typically in the brain and spinal cord. Okay. So you know, if we're talking nucleus or nuclei, that we are definitely talking about neurons that are in the central nervous system as opposed to ganglion, which are going to be in the peripheral nervous system, okay? So let's just put that down there. Remember, ganglia are in the peripheral nervous system, while nuclei are in the central nervous system. Okay. All right, so one more statement here, and then I think we're going to pause and ask for questions. Okay, so the last part of figure 16.9 that I want to put into your notes. Okay, so steps 2 and 3 were simultaneously with step 1, and then step 4 is also simultaneous, right? There's a lot of things going on here to control body motion. Okay, this is all about controlling body motion. So simultaneously, neurons of the cerebellum help regulate the upper motor neurons so the brain can literally monitor the difference between intended movements and movements actually performed. Okay. I mean, you can imagine every once in a while, maybe you do something silly with a body part and you're like, why in the world did I do that? Where you accidentally knock a glass off the table, right? You didn't intend to do that. You didn't intend to knock a glass off the table, but sometimes it just happens. And so there was a disconnect in what you wanted to do versus what you actually did. And so the cerebellum is helping to monitor that difference and take corrective action where it can be taken. Okay. All right. So, okay, ladies, I'm about 2 pages away from the end of my notes, but we are out of time. And rather than sit here and try to cram it into you, I think a better thing would be for me to stop and ask if you have questions right now, because again, this is our last time together before your final exam. So let me just take a pause here and ask you, do you have topics that you have questions about that you're worried about the final exam? Are there things that I can help you with right now to help you prepare for the final exam? Question, how much are questions 2 and 3 worth? They are worth a considerable amount. Let me see here. Hold on a second. All right, so just so you know, for all your essays, essay number 1 is worth 13 points. Essay number 2 is also worth 13 points. Essay number 3 is worth 12 points. Essay number 4 is worth 7 points. In terms of percentage, okay, hold on a second. So let me see. Your entire exam is worth 81 points. So essay 2 is worth 16% of your grade. Essay 2 is worth 16% of your grade. On average, I try to balance the multiple choice and fill in the blank as roughly 50% and essays as roughly 50%. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea. Okay, what else? Is there anything else you'd like to ask before we sign off for the day? I will be sending these notes to you this afternoon or later today.
I have a question.
Okay.
Would you be able to send us an example of a flow chart?
An example?
Or what pages can we look on to see for an example of the flow chart?
There is no example of a flow. Well, there's no example of a flow chart necessarily in these chapters. The study guide I sent out did have an example of a flow chart. Did you notice that? Okay. I don't give you an example of a flow chart for the nervous system, but I do give you an example of a flow chart about insulin. It's in your study guide. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that gives you an example of the basic idea of how you talk about the logical connection of one thing happening and then another thing happening. And that's what I want from you for your essays. Okay, so Jennifer, you're asking, so for the final essays 2 and 3, are we supposed to connect the info from chapters 15 and 16 like we have learned? That's the whole idea, Jennifer, yes. And that requires more work than simply memorizing. It requires you to integrate your knowledge so you see how processes are connected. And that's the point. Pamela, Suzette, hold on a sec.
Okay.
Pamela, are we supposed to write down the flow chart on the word bank when essays 2 and 3 show up, or just answer the questions and take the answer from the flow chart? I don't understand your questions, Pamela. The essays are going to be open-ended. There's going to be an open blank window that you type in information. I literally want you to type in your flow chart as your answer for essays 2 and 3. So you want to have prepared the flow chart in advance of the exam, thought it through, so that all you have to do is type it in during your exam. Pam, does that make sense? Okay. Jennifer, is the question about axe potential fill in the blank? No, it is an essay where you have to think about things, right? Your essays are not fill in the blanks. There's no fill in the blank paragraphs for these essays. I know you're used to that for the first 2 exams, but there are no fill in the blank paragraphs for this essay, for these essays on this test. Okay, Suzette, what was your question?
if there's going to be enough space for us to actually design our flow chart or type in our flow chart.
I'm not aware of a limitation on that.
Okay.
Of course, this is the first time we're doing anything like this, so technical gremlins could creep up. And, you know, if it does creep up, I'll deal with it. I'm certainly not going to damage your grade because of it. So my answer to you is do the best that seems reasonable. Don't freak out if there's a problem. If there's a problem, send me an email and just tell me what's happening, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay, gals, what else? So ladies, I am potentially challenge you. In some ways, I'm potentially challenging you differently than I have done in the past. But I feel okay about doing that because of two things. Number one, you have 2 hours to take this test. And number two, you are basically taking an open textbook and open notebook exam because we're not together in the classroom. So I am challenging you, but I think you can do this. If you take a step back and take a deep breath and realize that what I'm asking you to do is not as bad as you initially think it is. You're supposed to connect the dots so that you see how certain aspects of your nervous system actually work. And that is a hard thing to achieve. Okay, do you have any other questions? Okay, I'm not hearing anything else, so let me remind you of a couple things. Number one, I will be continuing to monitor email. Jennifer, is there a time limit? There's a 2-hour time limit. Oh, about when you can take the test. Jennifer, you can take the test between 7 a.m. and midnight. So you have basically all day long on Monday to do it. So if you want to get up, do a couple hours of studying, take a nice lunch, make sure you have food in your belly before you take the test, make sure you're in an environment where you won't be distracted by children and other similar beings. Then you have 2 hours to take the test, anytime between 7 a.m. and midnight on Monday. Okay. I will continue to monitor email, and I will try to answer your questions. But please don't send me an email Sunday night at 9 p.m. and expect an answer. Okay, that I won't do. But if you send me an email tomorrow, I will try to answer it for you. Okay. So, folks, this is it. We've come to the end of the road here. Okay, and so I just want to take a quick moment to thank you for sticking through the course. I mean, AMP is hard enough when we are under normal circumstances, but with this whole distance learning and the coronavirus situation and all the new challenges all of us have to manage our life, you know, this is extra hard. So thank you for sticking this through. I think you have proved to yourself that you can do anatomy and physiology. I mean, you've done well on the lab exam, generally speaking, and the second lecture exam was not horrible. I mean, you know, we always strive to do better, but you did a reasonable job under the circumstances, and this will be no different. So thank you for your hard work. If you need my attention, send me an email. But I wish you good luck in AMP2 and in your future academic career. Remember, you know, you're going to be future nurses and radiation technologists and dental hygienists and all kinds of amazing things. And your patients are really going to appreciate that you've learned something here in AMP. So thank you for your hard work. Good luck in the future. and be kind to yourself. After the semester's over, please allow yourself time to rest and relax a little bit because you've earned it. Okay, folks? So unless you have questions, we'll sign off for today. And you be well, and good luck on your final exam. I know that you can do this. Take care, folks. I'll see you, hopefully, some of you at school next semester. Hopefully, we'll be back. Take care.